Welcome back to EpistemiX. We are joined once again by Mohammad. Hijab. How are you, bro?
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum
How you
salam.
doing? Okay.
How's things? Good?
Not bad, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So today, bro, we're going to do a bit of a marathon series of videos. We're going to be recording one after the other. The first one we're going to start with, we're going to be dealing with a video that was put out by Rationality Rules and the Genetically Modified Skeptic on scientific miracles in the Quran, where they try to debunk the scientific miracles of the Quran, the supposed scientific miracles of the Quran, and they do a video called debunking the 9 scientific miracles of the Quran, something like that, right? You've seen the video?
I've seen it yesterday.
Okay. I have seen it quite a while back, but I refresh myself now once again. So let's start with this, bro. Let's deal with this whole idea, because we've seen a lot of atheists recently and over the past year or few years make videos where they tackle the scientific miracles of the Quran. The very first thing I want to do, bro, is I want to touch upon this whole idea of scientific miracles in the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
What's the issue with it?
The issue with it is that there are many issues with it. There are hermeneutical issues with it. There are philosophical issues with it. And I would say there are conflicting, other issues with it as well, which we can talk about. But just to mention those, like what kind of issues we're talking about when we say philosophical issues, the issues are relating to the philosophy of science, and also to usul al-fiqh in a sense, because in the principles of jurisprudence in Islamic studies, there's a classification of something as either dhanni or qat'i. Where dhanni literally means speculative or hasn't reached the level of certainty yet, and qat'i is a certain knowledge. And then you have gradations of that. So you have, for example, ghalabat al-dhann, which is a high level of so now it's not just speculative, but we have good reason to believe that. And then the spectrum is, as you would imagine, like quite wide, and then at the end of it is certainty, right? So in terms of the philosophy of science, the question is, to what extent are we justified in saying X scientific proposition is a fact? And this is loaded language. What is a scientific fact? Is a scientific fact incorrigible, something which is not cannot change, something which cannot be reversed, revised, revisited, falsified, or so on and so forth? And the answer is, for most things, if not, you could even philosophically say for all things in science, that's not the case. So what's referred to in vernacularly as a scientific fact from a philosophy of science perspective is not actually incorrigible or eternal in that sense. It can actually be reversed, it can be changed, and so on and so forth. So how this links to hermeneutics is that when, for example, in the ancient world, they looked at the sun going around the earth, and it was so, deeply entrenched into their psyches, and it was a certain fact for them that this geocentric model was certain. It was a fact for them. There was no two ways about it. It was actually not only a fact, but an observable fact. They saw the sun going around the earth, and they thought that was the most empirical you can be. But then when heliocentrism, or the heliocentric model, was popularized, it was kind of like a reversal of fortunes or whatever it was, and it was a paradigm shift in a sense in science, as Thomas Kuhn would talk about. So from that perspective, it's very important to be careful to use the word scientific fact as some kind of absolute thing, and then try and use that so-called scientific fact to then to approach the Quran. So from that angle, it's problematic. There's also a question of, okay, if something is certain and then you approach with the Quran this certain knowledge, hermeneutically, can you do ta'wil of Quranic verses? Meaning, can you use interpretive methods to try and literally fit the verse around this certainty? And I would say, well, in the first place, we haven't established the level of certainty that you're talking about. Although, there might be even large-scale support in the scientific community at one space and time, it doesn't mean that this thing is certain. As we've seen with so many examples, like you said, the geocentric model, the static or steady-state theory, versus the expansion model, and Newtonian physics versus Einsteinian physics, and so on and so on. So it's important to realize from the outset that science is changing. It's not something which is static. It's falsifiable. In fact, if it wasn't, it wouldn't be science. and therefore we have to have more of an agnostic attitude towards science. It's very important to have more of an agnostic attitude towards science, and so for that reason, it's problematic. And there's a secondary hermeneutical reason which I mentioned, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran in chapter 3 verse 7, where he says منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات. This Quran is divided into two different kinds of verses. Some of them are clear cut and other ones are ambiguous.
Yes.
And many of the verses that reference, for example, the beginning of creation and so on, they are actually not clear cut in this. It can be interpreted in different ways. So for that reason, to try and force one interpretation, which happens to be scientific, over two or three other interpretations, which may be unscientific, for example, or may be temporarily unscientific, is unjustified hermeneutically.
So I think what you're saying, just to summarize this the best we can, because you've touched on some really important points. Number one, what you're saying is, look, for us to claim a miracle, a scientific miracle, you have to do what you have to do is you have to draw a theory from science and pull that string and take an ayah of the Quran and a particular interpretation of the ayah and draw that string and tie those two together.
Yes.
But for you to do that, the scientific theory or point has to be an absolute fact that's not going to change.
Yes.
And the particular verse has to have that one clear-cut meaning, and all of the other interpretations are wrong, and that's the correct interpretation. And only then can you make that link and say, here is a scientific miracle. But neither are true in reality.
Neither are possible in most circumstances.
Right.
But I wouldn't say in all circumstances. Sometimes it is possible.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some scientific realities which, like I would say, if it's not yaqeen, is ghalabat al-dhann to a very high level.
Yes. But it's never 100%.
We cannot say it's 100% from a philosophical perspective.
Yeah.
You know, even things like, water freezes at X amount or water boils at another X amount. We cannot say it's 100%.
Yeah, because it's based on induction.
From a philosophical perspective,
course,
because it's based on induction and so on and so forth. However, there are some things which, from an Islamic perspective, we cannot deny.
Yes.
Like the existence of bodies, the existence of the universe, the cosmos, and so on and so forth. And these are basic things which happen to be scientific.
Sure, but that's based on the epistemic value of the Quran, not necessarily coming directly from science, right? But
also, there is an element of look around in the Quran. The Quran does not negate induction.
Yes.
In the sense that it says, look, فَانْظُرُوا, look around, observe, look, and so on. So if it was, and ayn al-yaqeen is when you see something and you can basically achieve certainty from looking at it so much. So in other words, the idea of observation churning out a certain kind of certainty in our being is not something which is negated by Quran.
Of course. But I think the distinction here we need to make is there is a difference between the observations of science and the scientific theories. And normally the links that are made with scientific miracles are the theories that are proposed with the particular verses, right? So obviously there's things we observe. We see the sun, we see the moon. Allah speaks about these realities in the Quran over and over again. So we don't deny those. Those are the Quran speaking about natural phenomena which actually do exist, right?
Yeah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Does he not know what he created?
Yes.
And he's the all-subtle, all-aware.
Yeah.
So in other words, Allah did create things. The natural world which is created by Allah, Allah is all aware of it.
Yeah.
The language he will use to communicate the natural world to us is a language which is facilitative, which is accommodating.
Yes.
Not just facilitating or facilitative or accommodating to scientists or people that are studying science, but it's facilitating to people of all different walks of life.
And I think that's one of the miracles of the Quran, bro. When you agree that the Quran speaks to people of all demographics, all backgrounds, all capabilities and abilities, and that's very powerful. Because one thing you see these atheists doing is when they try to refute these verses, they initially approach the Quran and they try reading it as if it was a scientific textbook, right? And then they take that verse with their particular interpretation, which is twisted, and then they try to match it up with the science and say, here is an inaccuracy. Right?
And likewise, apologists will do the opposite. So apologists will say, well, look, there is a scope here for interpretive correlation. So let's make a correlation between the scientific fact and the verse, but making it as if this is what the verse means, 100%. And you've closed the door now to all other interpretations.
Yes.
Which you can't do for many reasons. A lot of them are actually jurisprudential.
Yeah.
For example, if we're talking about abortion, You know, you can't just say, okay, it's 40 days and that's it. There is 102. That is an opinion. 40 days is an opinion, but you can't just close the door and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's important to realize that there's a danger of closing doors because of science, because of modern science, and also not to forego science. So there is a happy medium that we can kind of try and strike.
Yeah. I think something to also clarify here is that what is the objective of the Quran?
Guidance, isn't it?
So Allah revealed it as a guidance for humanity, and in particular those people of taqwa that will benefit from it.
Yeah.
That being the case, we know the Quran is guidance, and it's guiding people to worship Allah, back towards their Creator, right? So the ayat of the Quran are going to be speaking to people from this primary perspective, which is bringing people back to Allah, speaking to the human being, speaking to the fitrah. So worshipping Allah is the primary focus of the Quran.
Do you know there's a beautiful verse in Surah Al-Hajj, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِيَعْلَمَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكَ فَتُخْبِتَ لَهُ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَهَادِي الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. And this verse is very powerful because it made me think of kind of what you're talking about, but on a different level. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so that he was talking about certain situation, how he reveals revelation, shaitan tries to get involved, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deletes his intervention and so on and so forth. But then he gives a reason. He says, وَلِيَعْلَمَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ, so the people who have been given knowledge know that it's the truth from their Lord. فَيُؤْمِنُوا بِهِ, so that, and then they become believers of it. وَتُخْبِتَ لَهُ قُلُوبُهُم, and their hearts become inclined to it. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَهَادِي الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to guide the people who believe into the straight path. So this verse made me think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He leaves in the Quran is multi-layered in that sense.
Yes.
He speaks to different people with the same voice.
Yes.
And when I say voice here, I'm not talking about literal voice. I'm talking about in the same tone, right? So you've got in the same language something which speaks to this person and to that person. In other words, the Quran is meant to speak to the farmer and the philosopher. Yeah.
Yes.
It's meant to speak to the student and the scientist.
Yes.
It's meant to speak to the family man and, I'm trying to think of another F now to make it alliteration. And
the farmer and the...
Or maybe we can just say physicist, okay?
Yeah.
Even though it's not an F.
Farmer and the fisherman.
But then they're on the same level, isn't it?
They don't have to do the same things.
But you see, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran... A scientist could not look at the Quran and say this is completely ridiculous.
Yes.
It can't happen. Believe me, I've looked at the Quran. I know it very well. Okay, so you cannot say it's ridiculous from even a modern scientific perspective. You can't. And if you think it is like that, it's because you have received some kind of propaganda.
Yes.
At the same time, if you look at the Quran by looking at it and saying, okay, well, it's all science, like a scientific book, you've not understood the Quran. Yeah, we're trying to be objective here because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. One of the worst sins is that you say about Allah what you don't know.
Yep.
And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in the hadith, مَنْ كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ مُتَعَمِّدًا فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. Whoever lies about me intentionally, then let him prepare a seat in the hellfire. So we have to, when we approach the Quran, we have to be fair, objective, and look at what the author actually intended.
Yes. And I think you touched on a really good point, that it's that happy medium. Allah is speaking to all people, the whole of humanity. Hudan linnas, Allah says guidance for the whole of humanity. But I think tying in with this, we also know the Quran is guidance specifically for the people, or the people that will benefit from it are the people of taqwa.
Yes.
Right? Hudan lil-muttaqeen, where Allah says in Surah Baqarah. So understanding that, like you said, even if a scientist approaches it, I would say, like you said, they would not ridicule or dismiss the Quran.
Yeah, if they really honestly come to it.
Yeah, and that's the key. It's like humility.
Allah will make in their hearts, if they're really looking for it, they'll see that, subhanAllah, this is an ancient document, but it's hitting all the right chords from this perspective that it's not deviating from what we have observed.
It's not a scientific textbook.
No, yes.
But it says things which are in line with what we understand.
Yeah,
right? And that's quite powerful from that perspective.
Yeah.
That being said, bro, talking about people of taqwa and humility that approach the Quran and they will find guidance in it, we have the opposite end of the spectrum too. Some of the new atheists and atheists online that are attacking the Quran. Now we've clarified you can't claim scientific miracles in that type of sense in the Quran itself, and we've talked about it extensively, but just briefly to touch upon it. Like we said, we're going to talk about this video put out by the Rationality rules and the genetically modified skeptic, and they obviously tried doing a refutation of a video that some Muslim brothers put out regarding the scientific miracles in the Quran. Hopefully this will educate Muslims too as to why we shouldn't use scientific miracles and highlight the issues with it. But some of the claims that they make, how would you...
Well,
let me play you an example, right? And tell me, give me your analysis. So this is about 2 minutes 30 seconds into the video.
No problem, yeah.
And here Rationality Rules is giving his opinion regarding iron being sent down. See what's
Number 2, iron. Iron is not natural to the earth. It did not form on the earth but came down to earth from outer space. Scientists have found that billions of years ago, the earth was struck by meteorites. These meteorites were carrying iron from distant stars which had exploded. The Quran says the following on the origin of iron. We sent down iron with its great inherent strength and its many benefits for humankind. The fact that iron came down to earth from outer space is something which could not be known by the primitive science of the 7th century.
Now, the first thing to be said about this miracle is that despite protestations to the contrary, people knew way before the 7th century that iron comes from meteorites. For example, in approximately 1295 BC, or 1900 years before Islam, a hieroglyphic word appeared that literally translates to "from the sky," and it was applied to all metallic iron from this time onwards. So, using Quranic logic, I guess this proves that Aman Ra exists, right?
Pause it.
You know, as a side...
Okay, I think both arguments.
By the way, bro, he does what they do is they do this throughout the video.
So it's the same approach.
Yeah.
I think that both arguments are problematic. The argument of the apologists, Muslim apologists, and the argument of the atheist apologist, and they are both apologists.
Yes.
So the argument of the Muslim apologists is, I would say, inconsistent if you look at the whole Quran. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-A'raf, لقد أنزلنا إليكم لباسا يواري سوآتكم وريشا ولباس التقوى ذلك خير. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have sent down for you clothes, raiment or adornment, whatever you want to call it, to kind of cover yourselves and so on and so forth. Now, if you ask, or if you look at tafsir, does it mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally sent down clothes?
Yeah.
It does not mean that, or it could mean that, or it could not mean that. But what I'm saying is that for this to work, you have to suspend all possibilities of majazi meanings, or possibilities of it being a metaphor or a figurative speech. Even if you don't believe that there's such a thing as majaz for the Quran, like Ibn Taymiyyah had the opinion that there's no such thing as metaphor in the Quran. It still will be some kind of idiom or figurative expression.
Yeah.
You'd have to make sure, you'd have to be 100% sure that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدِ, we have sent down iron, that He does not mean by that, we have provided iron, we have created iron, and so on and so on. And you cannot dismiss that Allah could have meant that. That the author could have meant that.
Even the verse you quoted, bro, that Allah sent down clothing, right? But Allah ends the verse by saying, but the clothing of taqwa
is better.
In a very beautiful, poetic way, the clothing of taqwa. And so that the objective there seems to be getting the human being to reflect over the distinction between a physical type of clothing and that spiritual clothing.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. So, look, I mean, from that angle, the Muslim apologist needs to kind of tighten the argument a little bit. Because a Muslim growing up, going to listen to his propaganda, I think this is Muslims knows what he's talking about, then he's going to be presented with this verse. This, by the way, the argument I'm making could have been used by Rationality Rules.
Of course,
He could have. This would be a better argument than the one he's making. Seriously, He could have used, but he doesn't have no understanding of the Quran. Clearly, because he doesn't even approach the text, and that's not his fault, or it's not even a point of ridicule or criticism, because he doesn't have to have it. He doesn't need to know what the Quran is. He's not a theologian in that sense, but. From his perspective, he makes an even weaker argument, because what he says, well, look at these hieroglyphics, that these people knew it. So he didn't even need to go there, number one, because as I've mentioned before, he could have just said, this has to be consistent throughout the Quran. And number two, and it could mean it, but by the way, I'm not suspending the fact that وَأَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدِ could mean literal. It could mean that. But can you categorically say 100% it means literally physical like that? For you to say that, you'd have to say that the clothes also fell down from the sky, right? All right. So that's one thing. His approach is weak, even weaker, because it suggests that there was some kind of interaction between the Arabs and the Egyptians in such a way that the Arabs can now go into the Egyptian civilization and read hieroglyphics.
Yes.
Which the Rosetta Stone, we know the history, even if you don't accept that classical history, was what unlocked the hieroglyphics.
Yep.
So what? It's just because some Egyptians, I mean, if you look, the truth is this: if you go to the ancient world, the ancient people had discovered things about science as a collective that we probably have discovered now. There's probably someone, if you really go into the works of Galen,
you find stuff that was already
probably
discovered.
talk about quantum physics or something. Like, seriously, I mean, the point is the modern world has recycled ideas of the ancient world. In philosophy and science. You'll be surprised. In science they've come a long way because their methods have cleaned up and so on and so forth.
Technology's developed.
And technology. But the ideas keep churning and being recycled. So this approach is a little bit weak as well from a historical perspective, because then you'd have to go and prove how there was a connection between Prophet Muhammad, the Arabs, and the Egyptians, and in such a way that they would understand not only the spoken Arabic, spoken language of that time, because Egypt was part of the Roman Empire, but hieroglyphics, which is a very difficult task for him to do.
Of course,
so both arguments, in my opinion, they have merits, but they're weak.
And to add to your point, bro, I think what's interesting, because they do this throughout the video, they keep saying, "Oh, it was mentioned before,
Let's say another one.
Before we go to the other one, what's interesting is even if it's mentioned, right? Number one, the Quran Allah is not saying this is the only book this knowledge is being revealed in. Right, so Allah's not making the claim that it's never been revealed before. That's not the objective, right?
Yeah, good point.
It's not been mentioned before, therefore it's a miracle. Secondly, like you said, even if it was revealed or mentioned before to previous people, how did the Prophet, peace be upon him, get the information? That's another opens another can of worms from that perspective. And the third point I wanted to make was that it's not inaccurate. Right,
well,
that's another issue. Fine is mentioned before, but is it inaccurate?
So
no, it isn't.
Right? So he's agreeing with him. But look, so he's agreeing with an interpretation of the Quran which may be disagreeable to the reality, or it could be true, it could be not true. Right?
Yeah, and to be honest, most of the other points are the same as well, bro. But I think what's more important, what you can give him if they're watching this video, is give them some principles, please, bro. Something they can use.
All right, so I think one of the issues here is that he keeps saying, okay, what came before? He has to understand the Islamic narrative is that we believe that the first human being was a prophet, right? So if it was revealed before, it could have been revealed from a previous revelation.
That's our philosophy anyway. That prophet.
We have a hadith that says there's 124,000 prophets. Now, some have cast aspersion on the authenticity of that hadith, but let's just go with it for the sake of argument. That 124,000 prophets before the Prophet Muhammad, because he was the final prophet of humankind. So if that's 124,000 people, that covers a lot of time and a lot of space, geographic space and time and historical time. So from that perspective, what was revealed in those scriptures that was revealed to those, because a lot of people now, one of the theories or whatever is that, the story of Noah was copied from previous people, even from the Bible. They say the biblical story of Noah was copied. Well, no problem.
Did they say the same about Jesus?
Why do they say that? Because they'll go to Gilgamesh or this and that, and they'll say there was a myth of a flood or something. By the way, floods are very common. Do you know what I mean? That's why does it have to be mythological, right? How do you distinguish between what's mythological and what's not? The biblical story is different from the Islamic story anyway, but the point is, just because it was mentioned before, it doesn't mean it's copied. It could have mean that it was documented.
Yes.
It could mean it was documented. Like, for example, in Western history, you have something like the Iliad of Homer. There's a lot of mythology there, or embellishment of certain facts, but you can't say that everything in there is mythology. How do you even know what's mythology from what's not mythology?
Yes.
So that's a discussion, right? But the point I'm making is this, is that just because it was mentioned before doesn't mean it was necessarily copied. And even if it was mentioned, that actually corroborates the Islamic claim, because then it shows then there was revelations that came before.
Absolutely. Normally the example I give is, you could take any book. Say you take Ibn Kathir, one of the famous exegetes and scholars of Islam. You take his tafsir, right? Now, there'll be things mentioned in his tafsir which you find in his history. Does that mean that the Ibn Kathir tafsir is copying the history? No, it's the same author at the end of the day, right? So you're gonna see similarities in the text. Doesn't mean it's copied.
Absolutely.
That's one opinion you can have, but the other could be it's the same source, therefore there's similarities, right?
Exactly. The narrative is Allah kept revealing things to people, and so these stories would have been told many times, not just when the Quran came down.
So we've got 2 minutes, bro. Any other principles you would like to share with these individuals?
Is that all that they were?
To be honest, it's the same philosophy they follow throughout the whole.
All right, so if that's the same that they do, or look. So it's a good try, whatever. You're an atheist apologist, so obviously it's it's incumbent upon you to try and face this, great Abrahamic and world religion, followed by, quarter of humankind, or whatever. But I think there needs to be a bit of humility here. Okay, there does need to be a bit of humility. You're not going to be able to approach this book, as maybe a 22-year-old, 23-year-old young man or whatever, long hair, whatever you are, and just
you are a long hair.
not that there's anything wrong, but it's just. It's
and I just find it funny because normally you hijab the eloquence, and then you hear you are the long hair.
With the long hair and this and that ponytail, because it's that stereotype of the atheist.
Yeah.
Long hair,
Have you ever had long hair?
Huh? I had an
long
afro at one point.
Okay, mashallah.
Yeah. So you're going to come with your long hair,
Okay.
and trying to approach the Quran and this long,
If you had homonyms thrown in by Hijab near the end of the video, they're justified now, I guess. Cause
I don't have an issue with
your
it.
job
I
anyway.
thought I was going to debate him because he was actually meant to debate with Cosmic Skeptic in Oxford, and I looked at his debates. I actually don't have an issue with him as much. The thing with Cosmic Skeptic is that he actually attacks the sacred items of Islam.
Yes.
Right? And in a mocking way. He did it a few times.
Yeah.
And all it requires is you to do that for me one time, and that's it. I'm not your friend anymore.
You let us know that.
This guy, he criticizes Islam, but I've never seen him mock it. And even that, I know there was an issue with him and some atheists that they were trying to excommunicate him, right? They did tabdi'ah of him, basically. Yeah. In Islamic circles, tabdi'ah is when you consider someone not a heretic, but someone who is misguided, right?
Yeah.
So I know that when he went to America, he had a good time, because I was doing a bit of research. I thought I was going to debate him.
Yeah.
So he had a good time and whatever, and then they started refuting him, right? Because he said something about transgendered people or something like that. So it showed me, subhanAllah, that even this kind of cult-like human behavior exists even within non-believers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they had their own thing to protect there in America.
Yeah.
That they were protecting them. They were worried that they were going to get done by the LGBT community and the trans community and whatever. So they threw the guy under the bus. You get it? And I thought, wow, man, this thing plays out in all religions and all, even for the atheists.
It's all over the place.
But he maintained his composure, and he had a bit more decorum, and a bit more integrity than them, I believe. And for a country like America, you'd expect, because they stress freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and all those kind of things. You'd expect them to have even more of a support for this guy, but they didn't have that. So it's quite an interesting thing to watch. I invite this guy to Islam. I think that if he looks at Islam with a pure mind and a pure heart, I generally think that he would maybe have a different opinion on it. And I think that if I had a conversation with him, if he wants to have a conversation with me, it wouldn't be like the one I had with Cosmic Skeptic. Because once again, Cosmic Skeptic has to understand a young man literally probably just gone into puberty. Like 3 or 4 years ago.
Coming out.
3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
And he's talking about great religion, people and this and that in a mocking way. So he had to be taught a lesson. All right, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
But this guy, he doesn't come across like that. He comes across as a little bit more polished. So my door is open for communication with this guy, and if he wants to learn more about Islamic theology, I haven't got a problem with giving him the insight myself, and I'm sure you don't have an issue. We can both sit with him.
Of course,
or whatever.
he's more than welcome if he wants to
And
come
the other
down.
guy that was in the video, I don't know his name, the American guy.
The genetically modified skeptic.
I haven't seen much of his videos as well. But once again, if he wants to come and speak, unless there's a video, if you have a video that you're mocking the Prophet of Islam or mocking the Muslims, and you want to come and speak to me, then expect something. So expect humiliation, okay?
Right.
But if because what is that?
Yeah.
I mean, what do people think nowadays? Like they can just come and insult someone's mother and then go and have tea with them. What the hell, man?
Yeah.
But don't have the attitude that I know more about you than your own scripture, and that's you don't. Okay, it's simple as that. You don't.
So,
just come. We'll have a discussion. We'll share ideas. If you want to, we can. It'll be very nice.
So just to conclude, bro, like, can you give them some sort of resources where they can, if they want to really genuinely study the Quran? Say they don't want to meet, they don't want to come and speak to you, but they want to genuinely approach this book. Give them 3 resources that they can use, or 3 things they can do to really get a good understanding of the Quran.
Do you know, in the English language, one of the best things I've seen or heard is a podcast by Nouman Ali Khan. He did in the long time ago, about 10 years ago. He had this podcast of Juz Amma, beautiful, absolutely amazing. I don't know what he's been doing since then. To be honest with you, I haven't been keeping up with him as much. But his resources in English spoken,
It's brilliant.
is absolutely, I recommend it. I totally recommend it. That particular podcast, because I heard, if not the majority of it, a big portion of it, it was very nice. It was one of the best things. And so it's the Juz Amma, which is the 30th Juz of the Quran. He goes through it in a beautiful way. In terms of written things, just get a nice translation of the Quran. Nothing too complicated. Like, for example, when I was at SOAS, there was one of the professors there. His name is Abdul Halim.
Yes.
He's got his own translation of Quran, which I believe is one of the best.
Yep.
It's Quran translation, Abdul Halim, very beautiful, very nice.
Oxford Press, that one, isn't it?
It's Oxford
Yeah,
Press.
Oxford Press, yeah.
You can read that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hijab, Mohammad Hijab, for coming on. And thank you guys for watching. So make sure to comment below, click the subscribe button and the notification bell. Leave your thoughts, any questions. And we're going to carry this on because we're going to address another individual. But we'll leave that to next episode. Till next time, take care.